Okay, so this is about writing. So have a look at this. This is from a year 7 student who's been doing some work about trying to form a charity, and it's kind of quite clear what they've been doing from the piece of writing that they've produced. But looking at that, have a think about what it is that you think that they don't know, what they can't do, and more importantly, how would you solve some of the problems there? What advice would you give to that student? So I'll just give you a moment just to have a think. If you want to jot some ideas into the chat, that would be great. Okay, so you can look at that and you can see clearly that I think it's clear that this student doesn't know what a simple sentence is. They don't know how to write a clear sentence which communicates an idea. But if you're going to say to the students, oh, you need to write in sentences, clearly if they could do that, they would. So it's worth thinking about what else they might have to know in order to be able to do that. And to know how to write a sentence, you've got to actually know an awful lot of stuff. You've got to know all of this stuff. And if you don't know that, then you're really going to struggle to work out how to write a sentence. If you do know it, maybe even if you know it implicitly, you're fine. But if you don't, you're not. So this leads us to a question about how to teach grammar, and this is a fraught topic which exercises lots of different people. And I think broadly the division is between, should it be taught prescriptively, as in here are some rules which you should learn, or should it be taught descriptively and like that, different people do different things and we should celebrate the differences. And I'm going to suggest that a blend of the two is probably most important. That there are things that are sometimes taught in grammar lessons which are not real rules, like you can't split infinitives or you mustn't end a sentence of a preposition. Those aren't true, they're preferences. But there are rules. There are rules like you can't put a determiner after a noun. And we know those are rules, or we know those are real because no native English speaker ever does it. So if no English speaker does it, then it's probably worth thinking about whether it's a rule or not, and thinking about why. But other things, it's worth thinking about stylistic choices. But I think it's also worth thinking and introducing students to semantics and pragmatics. Now, not necessarily the terms. You may or may not want to introduce those bits of those specialized items of vocabulary. But essentially, what's summed up by those terms is being able to look at something and say, what does it mean? Why was it chosen? And what is its effect? And if you can do that, then I think you're in a great position. Now, in order to do those and ask and answer those questions, it's really helpful to have a specialized vocabulary, to have some ability with meta language. So how and why and where should we teach that? One of the ideas that I want to suggest to you is that there are 3 questions that I found invaluable in this idea of teaching grammar. And this is getting students to look at their own writing or look at the writing of somebody else, and to be able to ask and answer what options might have been available, and then to make a determination about why the one in front of them was chosen, and to also consider impact on somebody reading. And so, for instance, you take an area like the dreaded fronted adverbial, which finds its way into the news or the social media quite a lot. The point really is to be able to ask, what's the effect of using a fronted adverbial? What's the effect of putting that at the beginning of a sentence? How does it change meaning? What does it do to the information that's being communicated? How do we receive it differently? And if we're able to think those thoughts and ask those questions, then students are at a real advantage. Now, here's another book recommendation. This one even comes with a picture because I think it's great. If you haven't experienced The Writing Revolution by Judith Hockman and Natalie Wexler, I commend it to you. I think the bit about the thing that I love about this, and it came as a real revelation to me when I first read the book, is that their raison d'etre is essentially this: teaching grammar through content and content through grammar. and it completely sidesteps the idea about some of the problems that we've had historically about how to do this. And it's always mindful about asking questions about how particularly grammatical knowledge can be activated to help students make meaning. And it makes real efforts to familiarize students with language patterns which are rare in speech but common in writing. For instance, some of the techniques that it uses to do this, which we'll briefly look at, are sentence expanding, sentence combining, and the use of appositives. If you're interested and you don't want to buy the book for some reason, they've got some great resources on their website. They're quite American, so be aware of that. There's always a bit of a language barrier there, but there's some lovely stuff. There's some work on one of Malala Yousafzai's speeches. There's a lovely resources around Amanda Gorman's poem that she read out at Biden's inauguration, and various other things for a whole range of different age groups of students. So I'm just going to talk to you about some of their techniques. For the first one, sentence expanding, and it uses these three conjunctions in order to expand students' ability to think about subject content. So the whole point of these exercises is that they are embedded in the content that you are wanting students to learn about. And the grammatical teaching is almost done by stealth, but it enables and gives you practice at sentence level mastery. And that idea of sentence level mastery is something I'm going to come back to. But being able to write really good sentences, I think, should be relatively clear, is a solid basis for being able to write well. So if you take a clause like this, the Earth's outer shell is divided into several plates that glide over the mantle, full stop. We can expand that sentence with each of these three different conjunctions. So getting students to write those expansions using the conjunction because means that they've got to look for reasons. So why does it do that? If you're using the word but, you go, okay, so how is this information in any way contradicted? What else is at stake? So yes, the plates glide, but our experience is the world seems to stay still. And then what is the consequence of this? And the so helps you engage with that idea. And this was one of those little simple activities that I picked up in the book and saw and thought, oh, I can use this in a lesson next week. Brilliant. Sentence combining is something which is, again, really, really obvious and easy to do, and not something that I'd ever done explicitly before. There's me being a bit sort of scurrilous about this poor teacher, Miss Phillips. But the point of teaching that we might introduce here is, how do we use pronouns to avoid repetition, what parts, what's actually redundant when we're trying to combine these, and how do we make those choices? How do we restructure all that information so that it can fit into one sentence? And here's one. In answer to this question, so why does Macbeth decide not to assassinate the king before he changes his mind and does it? And these sentences are reasons, and trying to combine four sentences is obviously very, very challenging, difficult to do for anyone, let alone students. Obviously, we can decrease challenge by having fewer things to combine. 2 instead of 3 is obviously easier. But we can look at what's going on. We've got 2 sentences about Duncan, and could we put those together? Could we put the 2 about Macbeth together? And we clearly could. Again, looking for redundancy and making sure that we're excising that is the aim of the game. So that's sentence combining. Again, it's absolutely aligned to any kind of content that you're teaching. And what students are doing is, 1, they're getting practice at writing good quality sentences, which that's all they're doing. They're writing sentences, and which are very easy to give feedback on because they don't have tons of other stuff that they've written. And they're also thinking deeply about the content that they're learning about. So that dual advantage. The appositive is an expanded noun phrase, an additional noun or noun phrase. So there's the first sentence from Christmas Carol, and we've got once upon a time followed by 2 appositives, 2 noun phrases, which adds to the idea of the time that Scrooge is sitting busy in his counting house. So if you take Macbeth, either the play or the character, I'm sure immediately some are positives that you could substitute for Macbeth might spring to mind relatively quickly. Here's some that you could use. And similarly, if you're thinking about Scrooge, some are positives that you could use to describe Scrooge, I'm sure wouldn't take long to come to mind. Here's my little list. And the point here is that we're introducing students to something which is relatively rare. We don't use positives in speech, but they're used in written text all of the time. And by playing with them and becoming familiar with them, and by practicing writing sentences containing them, then they will master that idea, ideally, and become better at it, whilst also thinking carefully and closely about the subject content that we want them to be studying. So that's the basics of the writing revolution approach. There's a lot more in there, and a very, very quick run through. But I want to talk to you about something that's come partly from that, and I'm calling it Couch to 5K writing. This is something that we're trialing within our trust in a couple of schools, and so we've done some. We're not going to do anything particularly scientific, but we are doing some evaluation to make some broad claims about its effectiveness. But what we're investigating is this idea: what if developing stamina in writing is similar to developing physical stamina? So if you remember when I gave you that equation about cognitive load theory at the start, I said that one of the areas where we are intuitively blind often is quantity, and we ask students to do too much, particularly when it comes to writing. So we ask them to write more than is perhaps useful, and they end up writing badly, or deciding they can't write, they can't do it. And those of you that have tried to use the Couch to 5K exercise program, the app, maybe you've done it over lockdown, you'll know that it's absolutely designed to avoid those problems. That when you do your first training session, the goal is to run for 60 seconds, which is a challenge, but an achievable one. And you get to the end, and what you should be feeling is, well, I'm quite puffed, but I feel I could do the next session. Now, if the app, instead of doing that, said, first session, run for 5 minutes, most people wouldn't persevere. That would be it. But you slowly build up to 5 minutes. And so our question is, what if writing stamina is in some way similar? Because intuitively people, we say, God, kids have to write essays in exams. So the best way to do that is to get them to write essays in lessons. Maybe it's not. Maybe in the same way that we know running 5K is not the best way to learn to run to 5K, maybe the same is true of writing. So from there, the next question is, well, it's clear in running what 5K is. We can measure it really, really straightforwardly. What does that mean in writing? And so what we've decided 5K means is what students have to do under timed conditions in an examination. So the source of lengths of time that they're working towards there is the equivalent of the 5K run. So we're not marathon training. We're not writing huge extended essays. It's those short bursts that we want them to be trained for and match fit for in an exam. And then another question is whether they're different types. Running is far more homogenous than writing, and maybe different types of writing require different kinds of training programs. And so broadly, we found that we think that's true, and we've got 2 different training programs, one for descriptive transactional writing and one for literary writing or reading responses, essay type responses, literary essays. So I just want to suggest to you how the sorts of ways that we're going about that. So for your traditional transactional descriptive written task, the write a persuasive letter or describe a picture or whatever it is. The approach that we're taking is something that I've been working with on and off for years and years and years. And I've called in the past slow writing. You might have come across it in the form of slow writing in the past. And the idea here is that many students, either faced with this kind of task, they either write something really dull and boring, or they skip it and they go, I don't know how to do it, and they don't write anything or almost nothing. And both of those clearly undesirable. So the training program, the sentence level training program here, is on sentence level instructions. And so it's taking a prompt like describe your day, which is obviously really, really boring, and disrupting the pre-existing narratives that might be in students' minds. And we do this by asking particular prompt questions. So each of which has some instructional requirements. So for instance, we might say to them, right, the first sentence you're going to write is going to be a question. And so you teach them about different types of questions, perhaps how to add tags onto the end of sentences to create tag questions, whatever it is. But you show them how to write questions and then say, right, let's write your first sentence. Second sentence, in this case, in this example, is only going to be, it's got to be 3 words long, no more, no less. And if students haven't written 3-word sentences before, they're like, what, that's too short, I can't do that. So you show them the many and various possibilities that can be created with just 3 words, and how this varies the type of writing that they're producing, and how it's more interesting for a read, the type of effects that it might have. We might do this sort of thing where we'd say we want you to write a sentence beginning with a subordinating conjunction like although, which means that you'll then have to write a subordinate clause followed by a comma that pivots, and then you write something that's in a slightly different direction. So although this, comma, pivot, that, although something else. And this needs practice to get them to do that, and I would do perhaps that separately beforehand, get them used to writing this kind of sentence, but then get them to use it as as one of their prompts. This kind of thing I think is really useful, saying writing a sentence which is has a prescribed word length, which is quite long. And the way I would kind of model this typically would just go for a sentence, write quite a long sentence on the board, and then count it with the class. And usually I've overshot, and let's say I've written a 28-word sentence, and I talk to them about how I can take 6 words out, and how nouns and how adjectives and adverbs can be slotted in or slotted out relatively easily without disrupting the sense of the sentence, but how punctuation could be used to adjust length, and various other different techniques that we could use. And so that whole process of giving sentence level instructions, typically my experience has been that students produce writing which is often significantly better than they're used to producing. They have that experience of success, but it's been highly structured, highly scaffolded. So the next step is to think about, sat-nav to A to Z. How do we get rid of some of that structure? Now, what I do after teaching lots of different sentence techniques explicitly, I'd give students access to a list of, maybe 40, 50 different sentence prompts on a tabletop resource. So they're familiar with them all. They've practiced writing all of these different sorts, and they've got the resource there in front of them. And I'd give them a very short writing task. We're just going to write 5 sentences. That's our initial aim. And I might say to them, okay, pick the 5 that you'd like to use, and then maybe they read it out, and there's a class we can guess which ones they used, and the more practice they get at that, the next step is to move towards taking away the resource. And I'd be in lessons, I'd be doing things like saying to students, okay, you can have it for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to try you without it and see how you get on. And you can't have it today. We're going to try you without. You can still have it today, but next lesson we're going to try without. That kind of, if anyone's struggling too much, they can have it back, because I don't want them to go, I can't do it anymore, and to not experience success. But I do want them to know that they have to do it without in order to be independent. And we slowly move towards that. As they build up that capacity, we move from 5 sentences to ultimately perhaps 5 paragraphs. And as they get to the point where they no longer need the tabletop resource, they become independent, because the prompts, the ideas, the different types of sentences are within them. They're in their own long-term memory. They've been internalized. So that's the kind of a very, very brief overview of the structure of the transactional descriptive writing program, which is much the easier nut to crack, I think. So that's how that might work. And I honestly, if you've not tried it before, I can honestly say it produces quality of writing for students very, very quickly, which they're quite proud of and excited by. And they my goodness, I didn't realize I could write that well. And so it really ticks those boxes of getting them to experience success, and then presenting us with a challenge of taking out the structure so that they become independent. The literary essay is far harder. And what we've got so far, there's too much on this screen, obviously, for you to take in. So you can look at this when you get the slides in more detail. So this is a sort of rough one that we've been working with in some classrooms, is that basically we need to do sentence level mastery at each of these levels. And when they're embedded together, we've got the equivalent of a 5K run. So what I wanted to do briefly with you now is talk to you a little bit about that first stage, the topic sentence stage, and particularly the idea of crafting a thesis statement. So we've got here a question: how does Lady Macbeth persuade her husband to go ahead with Duncan's murder? Which, typically perhaps students might be expecting and might be asked to write a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs in response to, but we deliberately don't want them to do that. We want them to just write a one sentence analysis. So sentence level analysis is the point here. And we've got that same structure that I briefly talked about before, where we've got this pivoting thesis statement where there's one idea and then another which takes us in a slightly different direction. So here, the way I'd be doing this in the classroom is saying, okay, so the subordinating conjunction I've chosen is the word because, and because then in the subordinate clause that leads into, I want you to we're concentrating on what we know about what the character of Lady Macbeth has done, what she says, and so let's see what you can remember. And then in the main clause, in the red bit of the sentence, we're thinking about what Macbeth does, what his reaction to her statements are, what he ultimately decides to do as a result. And you can see in my example there that we've got the because into the subordinate clause with the comma pivoting to show we're moving from Lady Macbeth to the consequence on Macbeth. And so as a worked example, that would be the first stage. And then we've got a problem pair here, where we've got completely different questions, but identically structured responses needed. So different question about something else in the next scene of the play, about Lady Macbeth having to plant the daggers back on the murdered guards. Oh, they're not murdered yet, are they? Still alive, the drugged guards. And so here, same structure, but different subordinating conjunction. So we're beginning with although. In the subordinate clause this time, we're thinking about what Macbeth does, what mistakes he might have made. And then after the pivot, after the comma, we move direction to Lady Macbeth to look at what she has to do as a result. And so students can't copy any of the content. They've got to think deeply about the content knowledge, which helps them learn, in this case, the play that little bit better. But they can copy the structure. They can look back at the worked example to look at how this fits together to produce a thesis statement in the same manner. And this is something that I would do to the point, like we were saying earlier, don't practice until they can get it right. Practice until they can no longer get it wrong. Now, the real advantage, I think, for the type of writing that this encourages students to do is that as a teacher, you can give really precise, targeted feedback at any mistakes. You're only looking at single sentences, and it's really easy and effective to get them to rewrite them if necessary. And you can practice here. The quantity becomes the number of times they do this, rather than the trap of falling into the idea of writing lots and lots of poor quality writing and getting better at that. So that's the purpose of what's going on here. That ultimately, we can move forward. We take away some of the constraints as they get more effective. So I wouldn't have necessarily all the scaffolding in, but that's as with the transactional descriptive approach. The idea is that they have, for each step of the literary essay, if we go back to where we were before. So that after but at the same time, in different lessons, we're also practicing doing sentence level mastery of introducing and discussing evidence and analysing that evidence. And that ultimately, when we're good at all of those things, we can put them together to write the literary essay. And we slowly work towards that, making sure nobody's left behind, everybody's mastered each sentence type, and there's no reason why they can't put them all together, because one, they know the source material really well, they thought deeply about the content, and secondly, they are really practiced at writing these various different types of sentence. And I take you back to those points about grammar that I made before, that what I really, as part of this, I want students to be able to think about these 3 points, and to be able to have enough grammatical knowledge that they're able to answer them meaningfully. So the point of introducing terms, for instance, like subordinating conjunction, is there any value to that? And I'd say one of the reasons why I'd say it does have value is, one, it makes teaching much more efficient. If I use that term so often, and students become so used to it, and it's meaningful because it's relating to the content that they're learning about, then I don't have to stop and explain myself and say, okay, you use a word like because or although that does this kind of job, and which can be vague and ambiguous and are proxies. But if they know what subordinating conjunction is, they can just get right into it. And then they can look at they can use this knowledge then from learning these different structures, both from the transactional descriptive training program and the literary essay training program, to analyze as well. And so that you've got, hopefully the benefits go both ways. So that's my take on writing. The essentially what we're doing is less for longer. The building stamina by getting brilliant at different kinds of 60-second run, putting them together slowly into 5-minute runs, and moving up bit by bit to the point where we can get to that 5K target of being able to produce something meaningful under timed conditions.